Hello, friends. We are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. The views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. All that being said, enjoy this episode.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts, you have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Gabriel Custodiet. First, a couple of announcements. Be sure to check out our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature plenty of your favorite content creators on there. Also, if you download our podcast episodes through any podcast provider, do it through Spreaker. This is always free for you. We are booking guests for March. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. And be sure to watch the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana. That's available on Tubi and multiple streaming platforms. Today, I want to welcome Gabriel Custodiet. He is a host of the Watchman Privacy Podcast, which offers practical tactics to evade surveillance while also exploring the technocratic agendas of the powers that be. He recently published Privacy and Utopia, an intellectual history that attempts to explain the death of privacy by looking at its most recent origin, the rise of utopianism in the late 19th century. Gabriel, welcome. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. There's a lot out there in the dystopia, but also a lot of solutions. So I'm sure we'll cover both.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to getting into both, especially the solutions part, which is much needed right now. And we're going to share your research and insights into the ever-evolving surveillance technocratic state and the hidden dystopian agendas that have been unfolding for a very long time, as well as how to navigate these Orwellian waters and maybe some possible solutions, like you said, to avoid some of the coming chaos. Before we get too deep into this is your first time on. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this work.
Yeah, so as the audience probably knows at this point, I have a podcast, Watchman Privacy, and I talk about all kinds of things pertaining to the technocracy and also solutions for escaping it. So I think I have a pretty interesting show. And we make some products as well, escapethetechnocracy.com, where we sell some courses and books and resources to better inform you and to help you to escape. So many years ago, I became interested in privacy just as a strategy. And I definitely went down the rabbit hole and went really far. Okay, so we're talking about getting off of big tech, all big tech, including Windows, including Mac. Got onto Linux. Basically, don't really use a phone. I'm no social media. I am cash only, in person. Cryptocurrencies are a big interest of mine in the digital realm, especially privacy focused ones. And home address, big one. Don't know what it is. I haven't seen it. I don't even know what my home address is. I don't give it out. All that good stuff. And so as I went down that path, I obviously learned. I got a great thing about getting into privacy is you learn alternatives. And once you start, let's say, for example, just using a different search engine. Okay, you go from Google to DuckDuckGo. Maybe you end up on yet another one, maybe like a Yandex or something. You realize that you get a different experience of reality. Okay, you end up on Rumble, you end up on BitChute, you end up on the different parts of the internet. And as I did that, I got into more freedom-oriented politics and into slightly more conspiratorial things and things of this sort, and got a different perception of reality, which only reinforced the importance of understanding the technocracy, as I call it, not my word, of course, and then also how to escape it. So I started with privacy, and then funny thing is, I realized as I got into privacy, okay, let me build a brand that shows people how to do it. So I started writing my my book, The Watchman Guide to Privacy. I started to talk about these strategies on my show, on Twitter, etc., a newsletter, whatever. And I started interviewing people as well, grilling them on all the ways that we can be private and if their services and products work. And as I got into it, I realized there's not that many people interested in privacy. I would go to some of these groups and I would say, hey, yeah, it looks bleak, this and that, but there's a solution. And what I found is they weren't interested. A lot of them were only there because they wanted their fill of their doom porn for the day, and they wanted to be the cosmic victims. And I was kind of poking their bubble a little bit. And then, so that's when I started pivoting a little bit and talking about some of those things as well, which is also important. I do think there are solutions, but I also just talk about a whole assortment of things on the show. We had a whole episode on cults, for example, which my colleague and I have, I won't say too much, but some experience with the topic. We talk about all sorts of topics, AI, how to use AI for yourself on your own computer. I had a guy talking about the dirty things behind the scenes in Silicon Valley. That was one that just released today. So we cover an assortment of topics related to technology, also physical freedom, privacy, all these sorts of things. So that's kind of where it started and how it evolved to where it is today.
Excellent. That's a great introduction. Maybe we could start with the most recent origins of some of these technocratic control agendas, where it starts, maybe a little timeline and some of the highlights along the way, some of the big players involved, things along those lines.
Yeah, so really important to understand history, to go back in history. Obviously, the current moment is very pressing in our minds, right? Because it's what's happening right now. But the further back you go, the more you realize how what the people in the past did really is entirely what you're dependent on. T.S. Eliot has a good line where he says, some people say, we know so much more than the people who came before us. Well, what is it that we know? We know them, right? We know what they wrote. We know what they did, right? That's what we know. And so that's a good kind of call to understand history. So I wrote a book as well. I also wanted to answer this question. I wrote a book called Privacy and Utopia. And I tried to go back and trace the very clear origins of the technocracy. Obviously, we can go back very far. Plato's Republic, he's trying to create this idea of a utopia where you have all these rulers at the top and they're killing people who don't, fit their model and all this sort of stuff, eugenics, etc. So we can go back really far, but I think the logical place for me was about 100 years ago. So the late 19th century. This is when things really ramp up. And I do think that this is a big step in humanity where suddenly, for example, Darwinism, we understand things like heredity. And what's really interesting, and up to that point, like for example, up to the 16th century, people didn't understand that the blood circulated around the body, right? So we went through all of human history. We didn't know that until the 16th century when somebody decided, well, let me cut somebody open and actually look into this, right? We didn't know that the blood was circulating. So there are a lot of things that do change in modernity, much to the chagrin of the ancient historians that I talked to that think that all these people figured everything out. Well, there are things that change. And one of them, for example, is heredity, our understanding of heredity. And what's funny, Chris, is that as soon as this happens, as soon as we understand heredity, Francis Galton, a big figure in eugenics, he takes out a napkin and he writes on the napkin, eugenia. He comes up with eugenics right there, as soon as he understands the mechanisms of heredity. And so we have all these things happening in the late 19th century. We start to understand a lot more. And, we have things like the telegraph is invented and the combustion engine becomes a thing. Now we can travel around the world. Now we can easily get to Japan, right, and see what's going on in these places. And we can patrol land masses. And so nationalism becomes a thing. And now we can police people. And now we can communicate long distances. And now we can control and censor and have, guardians of the airwaves. Those kind of immediately crop up. The totalitarian impulses crop up as soon as these freedom technologies come about. So there's this really interesting immediate origin of our technocratic world around this time. So I talked about eugenics, nationalism, just an immense array of knowledge and understanding that is immediately leads to things like the welfare state, which leads us pretty quickly to government intervention into people's lives, which immediately leads to World War I, which didn't need to happen, right? But this was just an outpouring of nationalism, and now we have machine guns and all this tech, and the ability to control people, right? The passport comes about during this time. Throughout history, you didn't really need permission to leave or go anywhere necessarily. Now, in the early 20th century, still around this period, right, we have the passport that suddenly gets invented, and it's used immediately in Italy, not to let people go places because they could always do that, but to restrict them from leaving the country because now they are conscripted to fight World War I. So a lot of interesting things happening during this period. And my book kind of traces out both the technology that immediately leads to this collectivist impulse, this cult of safety, where people say, we understand the world better than ever before. Now we're going to control it. We're going to control people. And of course, it's not you and me who's doing it. It is the elite, the few people at the top. The samurai is the term that H.G. Wells has in all of his utopian fiction for these people who are much smarter than you, right? Much smarter than you and me. And certainly they have the ability to lead all of these unwashed masses.
Based on your research, do you think that these factions, these parasitic rulers that have steered the ship for as long as our documented history, do you think that they are always in alignment with their overarching agendas, or are there different factions with different ideas of the types of systems to control humanity and the different directions that they're going?
So I will say, I will caveat that I'm not very knowledgeable about how this evolves over the 20th century. I just kind of want to get to these ideas, right? To the ideas and how they've manifested in particular cases throughout the last century. Let's say I'm not the best person to talk to, but just going back to kind of first principles, what you see in this period of time is simply this idea, right? That we cannot let things, as H.G. Wells says, we cannot let people just choose on their own. Okay, you have to have a vision of society. You have to have a single goal, a single common goal, and then it cannot just be the people who are deciding. And so H.G. Wells, he goes to the Soviet Union and he looks at what Stalin's doing, and he's actually disappointed. He's like, "Yeah, I don't think you're severe enough, Mr. Stalin." He basically, literally says that. And so people such as H.G. Wells, obviously, he's struggling with he's vying with other people, and you. Probably a lot of people would say he's just one pawn on the chessboard, right? There's a lot of people higher than this public intellectual. So I really don't know the answer to that. In the end, the results are the same. And in essence, I tend to talk about more of these solutions to protect yourself, whatever the threat is. Mm-hmm. If I were to guess, I would probably lean to more factions and disorganization, just based on my understanding of, let's say, for example, over the last few years, climbing up the ladder, becoming acquainted with people who are in higher stations of life, running different shows and organizations and all the rest. And what I find with them is that they're really just as dysfunctional and disorganized and petty and all this stuff as anybody else. So it does seem difficult for me to think that there is a group at the top that's completely aligned about everything.
Right on. You mentioned H.G. Wells and his contributions to this current society that we're living in. Talk a little bit more about what he brought to the table as far as his ideas and what we're implementing now.
H.G. Wells is a big figure. I did not realize going into this that he was going to be the main antagonist. But then as I started reading his traditional fiction, okay, so this is how H.G. Wells starts. We're probably familiar, Chris, with War of the Worlds, The Invisible Man, The Time Machine, all the stuff we maybe read as kids, early science fiction. Very influential. What people don't realize is that after he wrote those few books, he kind of stopped being serious about science fiction, and he dedicated the rest of his life, like the next 80 books essentially, to advocating for world government, technocracy. As far as I can tell, he literally coined the term the New World Order, right? That's his book from the 1930s. He literally coined the term. And so that's the stuff that he becomes interested in. But in his early fiction, you can see what's happening. Look at War of the Worlds. It starts off by this alien race, the Martians, who read the first paragraph. They are looking, it starts with them looking at the earth. They find it wanting. They see it's disorganized, it's decentralized. In other words, there's too much freedom. And they're going to go destroy it because that's what conquerors do. And the entire message of the War of the Worlds, when you really read through it with that lens, is that, and this is very explicit in the book. Let me see if I'll try to track down some quotes as I'm talking here. But essentially, what he's saying in the book is that, look, London, which is the city being attacked, is too disorganized. There's no common goal. Everybody's running around, and they deserve to be killed. Like, humanity deserves to be destroyed. There's no judgment against the Martians in that book. Go find a judgment against the Martians. H.G. Wells is on the side of the Martians, okay? Because this is this technocratic, superior life form, okay? This is the kind of people he thinks should be ruling, that has a fuller sense of the cosmos, and that has gone and exterminated people who are worthy of extermination. So that's what you find from War of the Worlds: invisible man, assault on individualism. Anybody who is separated from society goes insane is kind of the story. And there's a lot of good quotations about how his sin, his ultimate sin, is he's not sharing his discovery with the greater scientific collective. Is his main sin. We look at the time machine. Basically, the idea here is that if we don't change course, if we don't have a direction, if we don't have a scientific method to arranging society, we're going to end up these monstrous versions of ourselves far in the future if nothing changes. We have to take the reins of history, we meaning him and his buddies, and we have to change course. That's the moral of that. Another good book is The Island of Dr. Moreau. Very disturbing book where there's this vivisectionist, okay, a guy who experiments on animals while they're alive, and he is shunned from society. So he goes and creates this island where he does these experiments. And he tries to create these, he tries to change animal brains so that they become human, okay? And he believes in the plasticity of forms and all this other stuff. And it's kind of a support of this experiment is what you find in that book. And of course, he creates a cult, and he's the leader. This doctor becomes the leader of these animals. Very disturbing book, but you can kind of see there how this guy thinks, how H.G. Wells thinks. H.G. Wells was a big proponent of Darwinism, right? He thought that there was no innate value to humanity, that they were just the happenstance winners, we might say, of this long struggle, and that there was nothing inherently good about humanity. Obviously, a big atheist as well. And he thought that the only purpose of humanity was to be guided against our bad impulses by people who are able to do so and who know better than we do. And he came up with all these control mechanisms, right? He has the book called The World Brain, which is this early idea of the internet, okay, quote unquote, where basically everybody has these encyclopedias, but they're also talking by telegram. That's kind of what they had, the technology at the time. And they're updating their ideas at any given time. It's like, hey, we have a better understanding of this. And of course, when you get to the essence of it, it's like, oh yeah, this is an approved group of elite scientists who are telling you what is true and what is not. So anywhere you get to, like his book, A Modern Utopia, once you get to the end of it, once you start asking the questions like, wait, who's in charge? Yeah, it's those guys at the top. And if you fight against it, as he says in A Modern Utopia, you're going to be sent off to an island prison where you'll be forbidden from breeding. So that's kind of the stick. And this is what H.G. Wells, huge proponent, George Orwell has a great line. He says, nobody influenced the English-speaking world intellectually more than H.G. Wells in the first two decades of the 20th century. He was a huge figure, monumental figure, published like 100 books in his life, had the ear of Winston Churchill in Winston Churchill's early days as a creator of the welfare state. A very influential figure, big proponent of world government, and a few people telling everybody else what they can and can't do.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the evolution of this technocratic state. Of course, as our technology develops, the control systems grow stronger. But if you have eyes to see and you look back at our technological history, there's nothing really developed that is truly benefiting humanity. If you step back and take a closer look, it's all about some sort of control, some sort of surveillance and culture creation. I'm sure that mind control operations were integrated into some of these technological agendas, and I'm sure it's very much responsible for a lot of the mental health problems we're seeing today, where we're at as a society. But maybe talk a little bit about the evolution of this dystopian technocratic state that we're in.
I'm happy to do so. So as we go along, what's funny is that H.G. Wells he writes this book in, I think it's 1905, A Modern Utopia, where he lays out, here's how a perfect society would work. And, there's private property, but it's somewhat communal as well. And you wouldn't begrudge that, right? And so if you do begrudge that, well, we're sending you to the island prison. So it's his perfect world. And of course, there's tracking and tracing. At the time, fingerprints was the kind of the technology of tracking. So he talks about how, the people in this world, they use a fingerprint and that identifies them and who they are. And as we go along, we get a lot better tracking mechanisms, obviously. And the computer age has, and the advent of AI, which isn't quite what people think it is, but it is able to, it's good pattern recognition, right? And that can lead to exposure. So as we go along, what's funny is that a modern utopia becomes the chief inspiration for the dystopian genre. And so the dystopian writers of the 20th century, there's a great book by Ian Forster called The Machine Stops. Great book about a city that's underground. A machine controls everything. And of course, there's rank nihilism and all the rest. But he had in mind specifically H.G. Wells' book, A Modern Utopia. And as you go along, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, he has this in mind as well. And George Orwell as well. But let's focus on A Brave New World, because here we have 30 years later, Aldous Huxley is writing a book which is very prescient, in much more ahead of the times than Orwell, who would publish his book 15 years later. And Aldous Huxley says that where we're headed is towards dystopia, and it's not going to be how we think, right? It's going to be mass consumerism. There's going to be manipulation including the genetic level. If you read Brave New World, they're manipulating embryos at the genetic level to be inclined more towards certain things. And we know these days with CRISPR and such that you very much can affect people's. For example, I was watching the recent RoboCop remake, and basically what they did is they messed with his brain levels, and suddenly he has no empathy, right? So they're controlling him at a mechanistic level, and at one point they're trying to solve the problem, like how's this going to work? He's panicking, and they just remove whatever chemical from his brain, and now he becomes a dutiful servant, right? Yeah. So we have these chemicals in our brain that really give us our experience of reality. So that's what Aldous Huxley is talking about in Brave New World, where not just are they manipulating you at the birth level, the genetic level. Once you get out of the womb, you're already determined to be something. But then you also have the propaganda, the conditioning that is being foisted on you at this period of time, late 20th or early 20th century. We also have an understanding of conditioning, right? The psychology of conditioning, Pavlov's dog, and all the rest. And that becomes a really powerful idea, which does work. One of the funny stories, by the way, is Pavlov, when he discovers classical conditioning, is what we call it. Stalin sends him a letter, and he says, to Comrade Pavlov, we've increased your rations for your discoveries. And I joke, I'm like, we can only imagine how much Pavlov salivated when he read that letter. But so we have this idea of conditioning, of genetic manipulation, of course, eugenics, and also pharmaceuticals, right? Pharmaceuticals become a big thing. Big part of Aldous Huxley's world, they're on Soma, which is this kind of impossible drug which gives you a euphoria and it also makes you calm somehow. And it basically, it's also, because Aldous Huxley was a big proponent of psychedelics, it also has a psychedelic element to it. And one of the characters famously in that book, who is kind of trapped in outside of this world for a while, once she comes back, she immediately goes on Soma and hits it so many times that she dies very quickly. But she does not want to get off of it whatsoever. So you have all these things that are coming together. And you can see it in A Brave New World, and it is in many ways a blueprint for how you can be controlled today. Through all these particular ways. We can get into more specifics, but it's just a good kind of advancement from H.G. Wells to Aldous Huxley, who's pointing to all these modern mechanisms, pharmaceuticals and conditioning and various eugenic sorts of things, how those can be used to control people.
It seems like it definitely all came together, and it is the perfect storm of these different techniques to get people docile, mind controlled, and in a certain state and keep them that way. We look at our modern technology and how people have become addicted to social media and reliant, and they get all their information from this. And it's a completely controlled narrative, not only through our television and entertainment industry, which used to be our sole form of getting information from the rest of the world, finding out what's happening on the other side of the world. Now it's all at just the touch of a finger. Not only that, there is very little regulation when it comes to children online and what they have access to. Let's talk a little bit about what we are facing in our modern age. We know about the surface things that we can interact with and the dangers, but there are so many layers and levels to this. And maybe just starting with the terms and conditions that we agree to with almost every social media platform, new software that we get, cell phones. What are we really agreeing to with some of this stuff?
Yeah, that's a great point. Less experienced myself in researching things like MK Ultra, 5G, those sorts of things, but this is definitely my cup of tea. I'll just correct myself, by the way. I said when Stalin sent a letter to Pavlov, it was Lenin. So I do have a sense of history. Stalin was by the time Pavlov died, Stalin was still not in his position. So just to clarify that, in case there's any historians, we're gonna send me death threats. So there's a hilarious, well, the terms and conditions, and we might call this also something called dark patterns. So if people want to look this up, it's called dark patterns. And what happened when we get to this high level of corporatism in big tech, where the lawyers are really running things, is that we do have all these terms and conditions, and we have all these psychologically exploitative ways of dealing with people. Now people are looking at their screens in the digital age, whatever crazy number, 10 hours a day. And so we are going to try to manipulate them every way we can. So we have all the ads that we see, and we have all the ways that a website is designed. And believe me, I have a background in e-commerce, and I do run an e-commerce shop, escapethetechnocracy.com. We try not to do this stuff, but maybe there's a little bit here and there where we're trying to get you to click on things, to do more things. And the terms and conditions, of course, is kind of a part of this as well, where like you can't even play a video game these days a lot of times without accepting the terms and conditions. And what are you accepting? I don't know. I've never read those, to be honest. I don't think anybody's ever read those. But essentially, if you were to read details, let's talk about your Steam video game collection. You don't own those. You don't own those. They own those, and they can take those away anytime they want. Your Microsoft account, and by the way, your Microsoft account might be attached to your Windows computer, and also your Xbox profile, and also your Skype account, and also your Microsoft Office 365 always online software. And in the Microsoft, I haven't checked it like very recently, but I did a year ago, they have a hate speech thing in the terms and conditions where if you say something that is hateful, they can shut down your account. Now, I think that would cripple your Windows computer immediately. If that were to happen, potentially, like you lose your license, can't use your Microsoft, can't use your Xbox, can't use your Skype. So those are the sorts of things that you find in the terms and conditions. They can kind of say whatever they want. We know that they own everything, and you're not happy, right?
Yeah.
And we know that you're renting all this stuff. The Ubisoft is a big video game company. Their CEO came out last year, and he said that we need to get people comfortable with not owning their video games. That's the next step that needs to happen. Funnily enough, the Ubisoft stock price has gone down tremendously since he said that. So I think some people are waking up to this. There's obviously more things going on. They make terrible video games that are approved at the kind of corporate level of all this testing and garbage, which means that no original art seems to be created these days. Can't watch any films these days. They're utter rubbish. Same goes for video games. But these terms and conditions put all sorts of things in there where the worst thing, of course, is you're renting it, you don't own it. And that's why we need to find alternatives, right? That's why I don't use any of this big tech stuff. I don't really use any Microsoft products as far as I'm aware. And I use free and open source software. This is really the solution. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But yeah, the terms and conditions basically tell you what we kind of know, which is that they own everything and you're not happy.
Right on. Let's talk about Some of the problems that I personally face and many others in the podcasting and independent content creation space, and that's shadow banning, censorship, having the algorithms determine if you're going to be viewed or not, being stuck in echo chambers, these things. It seemed like it was around, I think it was 2016 or something. I just noticed I was on YouTube and I had a very fast growing channel. I think it was almost getting close to 40,000 subscribers, very decent views. And all of a sudden, one day it just seemed like everything got shut off. I was no longer getting the views. My subscriber count completely got shut off. And then shortly after, I started getting hit with all the strikes for the medical misinformation and all the BS that started happening during COVID. But it seemed like a bit of a process that started happening around that time frame where the algorithms seemed to change, the viewership and how much we were being recommended and all that stuff just completely stopped for certain types of content creators. Could you talk a little bit about that process, what happened during that time period?
Yeah, so all these companies that you use, Twitter, YouTube, maybe it's Spotify, whatever the case may be, they're in control. And they have algorithms, which people are aware of now, that can do whatever they want them to do. Okay, this is not some objective world where in the past we type in a website directly and we get to that forum. And then once we log into the forum, we can see everything chronologically. Nothing's being taken out. Nothing's being censored. It's all right there. That's not how it works, right? You go to Twitter, the stuff there is not happening chronologically. It's not one thing after another. It's not showing you everything from the people you follow. It's simply not doing that. What Twitter is doing is it's saying, hey, we have a better understanding of things, right? This technocratic worldview. We know what you want. We're going to figure out what you want. And you know what? You want that thing? Well, we're not going to give it to you, okay? Because that's medical misinformation. So a lot of these are black box too. We don't always know what's going on in the algorithms. When we do get a glimpse like Twitter, what we see is, they have the government has directly told Facebook, et cetera, to not show certain things. And shadow banning, we're very familiar with, it's simply part of this as well. If you say the naughty things, then you're not going to get exposed. And if you don't get as exposed, you won't get as many followers, you're not going to get as much funding, et cetera, et cetera. So that is essentially what is happening. That's why I'm grateful for podcasting and newsletters. And I have a whole branch where I show how to cancel culture proof themselves, right? So I've advised people on that, and we generally talk about that sort of topic. But we've gotten past a lot of these barriers in some ways, right? We can get the message out. I see more and more people are aware of things, right? Like Ross Ulbricht was recently pardoned. So I go into all my Telegram groups, and of course people, it's like, no, it's he's an actor. That was a fake pardon. So the point is, people are very skeptical, and people are waking up. Sometimes they go too far, but I've never seen more people kind of aware. So the news is spreading. We do have, like Telegram, for example, is a great example. It is a big tech platform. The CEO was recently arrested, and he's doing more of a crackdown. But in general, it's a very free-flowing, non-algorithmic way to get access to direct information from people who are on the ground. And at least in the past, their moderation policy was, we don't moderate, right? That was literally their moderation policy. So we have a lot of examples like Telegram and the podcasting and all these alternative video platforms to get around some of this stuff. So we just need more people to migrate over to those, and we will solve the issue. Because again, when you're using big tech, when you're on YouTube, they are telling you what you want to see. And sometimes they will funnel you into a corner as well. They will funnel you maybe into the super conspiratorial corner where there's a lot of psyops happening, right? So they can do all kinds of things like that. So that's essentially what's happening, and we can fight against it. It's important to be on all these alternative channels, and don't press for algorithms, right? We want to see everything, and we want to see it one after the other without anybody telling us what we should and should not see. My friend was recently telling me he misses the forum days of the early 2000s where we have a forum. We see everything that people are saying. Sure, it's chaotic, Telegram style. Sure, it's chaotic. You have to do a little bit of work. There's some garbage in there, but that's better than being fed what they want you to feed, what they want you to eat.
100%. Yeah, and we're definitely going to get to some more solutions here shortly. But I want to inform the audience of some of the things that they may not be aware of just by utilizing some of these big apps. To what extent is our privacy being infringed upon by just using some of these social media platforms and some of these larger platforms?
Well, let's just say that you have YouTube on your phone. Okay, you have YouTube on your phone. You're walking around your neighborhood listening to something. Well, you have something called an IP address. Okay, this is an identity that your device has anytime you connect to the internet. So that is transmitting your location. Okay, and so you're walking around your neighborhood, and let's say there's a crime that happens in that neighborhood. Well, what is the law enforcement going to do? A lot of times, what they'll do is they'll go to a company like Google. They'll say, "Hey, we need the geolocation of all phones that were running Google-related products in that area." This has actually happened. And a guy got an email saying that, "Hey, we've given your data to law enforcement from Google," right? And that guy had to spend a lot of money defending himself, tapped into his savings, got help because he happened to be in an area where there was a crime committed. And because he was revealing himself through his, I think that in this case, he was just had an Android phone. Okay, so that's Google. So Google has the ability to pinpoint your location when you use a Google phone. Okay, so that's one example. Okay, that's one example. Anytime you're using the internet anywhere, the internet service provider has the ability to see what websites you go to. A lot of people don't really realize that. So that's why I always use a VPN, Tor. We'll get to those later. But they can see that by default. They can see what you download. They can see what websites you visit. They can't see things like what you're typing, et cetera, unless you have a malware or something like this. But they can see the websites. Your phones have the ability to listen. And so you should assume that they are listening. Your Alexas and all these assistants are also doing that. And there have been many cases where they have shared that, or law enforcement has got access to that. And of course, not just law enforcement, Amazon, right? What is Amazon doing with that data as well? Is the question that you want to know. They're selling it to other people. When you use something, any of your financial transactions that's being shared with many different places, they have a good read of what you're buying, where you are. Okay, let's say that you go to, let's say somebody's really off the grid. They say, okay, screw the government, screw all this. I'm going to go buy some pieces of gold. So they drive to their gold shop. Well, what's happening along the way? Are there license plate readers, right? There's a website called DFlock, which shows you all the license plate readers, and there's private companies that are detecting where you are in many cities. So is your license plate reader detecting where you're driving? Oh, hey, he's in the neighborhood of this gold shop. And did you bring your phone with you? Well, maybe Apple and Google now know, okay, he's in the parking lot of this gold shop. So this guy owns gold, most likely. You walk into the shop. Are there cameras? Okay, if there are they seeing your face? Did you not cover your face? And if so, are those like private companies? Where's that data ending up? Okay, they see your face, facial recognition. Oh, Jim is in the gold shop. He's buying gold. You use a credit card to buy your gold. Well, does Visa know and your bank and whoever else know that you bought gold? Yes, they do. So there's a lot of ways that you reveal yourself. And by the way, also on your phone, did you have Uber up when you walk into that shop? Well, now Uber knows your location. They have the ability to do that. You granted them location access. So a lot of the other apps on your phone are going to see what you're doing. And by the way, on the way to drive there, were you talking to your friend in your car and you have a post 2015 car which has a microphone in it, which is or has the ability to send that data back to Hyundai or Toyota or whoever about your conversation about why you're buying gold, you hate the government, et cetera, et cetera. Is that going to be read by the jury, right, if you were arrested at some point? So there's a lot of things to consider here. It's not hopeless, but just to give people an idea of how bad it can be.
Before we get to solutions, let's talk a little bit about AI and our future relationship with this. There's, of course, it's a double-edged sword. There is a lot of negativity and confusion and misinformation that's coming out of what people are using AI for, the AI art, some of the conspiratorial, like you mentioned, rabbit holes are being managed by AI, and it's getting chaotic out there. But maybe we could explore some of the negative and positive sides of this.
There are both sides to it for sure. I was a super AI Skeptic, I still am, but that doesn't mean there's not use for the tools. So my colleague and I just created a course. It's called the AI Anti-Technocracy course. And it's on our website, escapethetechnocracy.com. I think it's a really dynamic course that shows you what I'm about to tell you, which is that AI has some serious consequences for humanity. It's not entirely in the hands of the elite and the big tech. We can own this for ourselves. We can download it on our own computer. We can use it in a private and uncensored way. And the current manifestation of AI, as far as I understand, is very limited. I just released an episode by a guy today who's in the AI industry, and he's basically saying, look, this is not smart, right? AI in its current manifestation is not smart. Because its current manifestation, people know Chat GPT, things of this sort. These are called large language models. Basically, what they did is they couldn't figure out how the human brain works, right? Nobody has replicated the human brain. As far as they're aware, it's not replicable. And so they're just trying to throw stuff against the wall and try to create something that's kind of like a human brain, right? Artificial intelligence. The best idea they came out with recently, of course, is the large language model. So basically what they do is they feed to a computer a lot of data, and they train the computer that, hey, this is a cat. This is not a cat. Okay. So there's a lot of human reinforcement suggesting, okay, this is correct and not. In many cases, this is farmed off to like Kenya, people in Kenya who are doing this for $2 an hour. Okay. So it has to be approved. And they basically do this with thousands and tens of thousands and millions and billions of pieces of information. And then at some point they let the AI on its own. So it scours the internet and kind of reinforces itself and these sorts of things. However, it doesn't have human knowledge. Okay, so it takes thousands of images for it to understand what a cow is. Meanwhile, you could tell your daughter, your 3-year-old daughter, hey, that's a cow. Okay, she gets it instantly. AI can't do that. And even if AI trained itself on thousands of images, well, is the cow now on sand? Okay, it's never seen a cow on sand, so it's going to be confused. So AI in that form, it's kind of dumb. It does some interesting things, but it's kind of dumb. This is not Skynet. Okay, is this the first step to Skynet? If Skynet is possible, then yes, this is the first step to Skynet. Are there things with AI that we're not aware of? By definition, yes, but I don't know what they are, right? I don't know what they are. I don't know how advanced it is. For us and our purposes, there are some uses to these. I like the art-based AI, for example. Pull up an art-based AI. Midjourney is one. It's not a freedom technology. It's proprietary, et cetera. They see what you're doing, but I use that sometimes. I type in, image of a fire-breathing dragon in fantasy illustration style. Bam, 30 seconds. I have 4 awesome images. Pretty cool stuff. With the text-based stuff, you can use it for all kinds of stuff as well. It can be useful, right? It can be useful. Hey, give me 50 multiple choice questions for a 6th grade geology quiz. 10 seconds, it's done. So it has some uses for sure. It does have some problems. What I talked about, the errors, they have a term for that. It's called hallucination, right? In other words, that's their euphemism for it's dumb. And hallucination can happen sometimes. I say, hey, what's the first paragraph of James Joyce's book Ulysses? And in one case, it told me the first sentence, and then the second sentence was in the same style, but it was totally wrong. So the AI was messing up at that point. So it does have errors, but it does have uses. And in terms of the cool things you can use it for, I show in the course, we show how you can download that there are open source versions of this AI. In other words, people have made them open source. We can see what's happening, and we can do whatever we want with these models. Chat GPT is not open source, but there are other models that are. We can download these onto our computer. Okay, they're actually pretty small considering what they know. It's pretty impressive. And I can turn off my internet connection, and I can ask it all kinds of questions. Hey, the electricity's out. What are my options? I was just bitten by a cobra. How do I treat the wound? Right? You can come up with very quick information, right? What did Winston Churchill, what was the first law he signed into action? It knows Wikipedia. It's read Wikipedia. It can tell you that very quickly. Hey, here, let me upload this book. Tell me the main points. Bam, done. Tell me what it didn't cover. Okay, you can actually do very creative things. What is it missing? What did this book not cover? Bam, it has an answer for you. So there's some really useful ways that you can use it. You can use it to fight against the technocracy. We show, for example, hey, here's my writing. Change it in a way that it doesn't reveal my fingerprint, my writing fingerprint, which if you use a certain series of words one after the other, it can tell who you are. Well, scramble that. Okay, you can tell it to scramble that. Done. Instantly does it. Retains the same meaning. So there's a lot of useful tools if you want to take AI into your own hands, because we really don't want it to be just in the hands of them.
Any thoughts or concerns about what may be implemented with this upcoming with this current administration now? I checked out of politics a long time ago. To me, it's all theater, but some of the agendas that are implemented will affect people, however minuscule, depending on where they decide to go, especially with the surveillance technocratic state and what they plan on implementing with that. Any thoughts on our near future with what the upcoming administration has to offer?
Very few, because like you, I've checked out of politics, and I either think really far back in time, or I think about solutions regardless of who is in power. And I just always assume it's the worst possible adversary is how I operate. And so, look, Donald Trump recently pardoned Ross Ulbricht. Ross Ulbricht was the creator of a dark net website where you could voluntarily exchange things and sell them. Pretty much whatever you want, some limitations, drugs. I'm not sure if guns were ever part of it, but all sorts of things. So he was sentenced to a double life sentence plus 40 years. Okay, more than El Chapo, for a guy who, as far as we know, never actually directly harmed anyone. So Trump pardoned him, and Trump said, "Yeah, that's garbage." It's clear that was a activism. That is the reason he's in there. So that's cool, but I don't know what else this guy's going to do. Doesn't seem like he has too much of a core, but he might accidentally, or for reasons of a deep conservatism, do some useful things. But I tend not to think about that too much. I'm more interested in kind of the big tech players. I hope, for example, I do hope that Trump eases up the attack on cryptocurrencies, especially the privacy-focused ones. Monero is a good option for when you can't use cash or gold or something in person. Monero is actually a pretty cool tool. I talk about Monero cryptocurrency a lot. Very cool technology, very great stuff. Great example of useful internet technology, of which there's very limited amount. But no, in general, I have a kind of an anarchist perspective. So I'll take whatever victories I can get in the Trump administration. It looks like, I don't think all nationalism is bad, for example, but we'll see what happens, and just hope for the best. And in the meanwhile, always focus on ourselves and what we as individuals can do.
I'm with you on that one. And it's definitely smart to probably look at the technocratic players, because they most likely have more power and control than any president ever has. But let's get to some solutions and maybe ways to navigate this technocracy that we're in. First of all, let's address decentralization. Talk about what decentralization really is.
Yeah, it's a buzzword. Gets you funding, VC funding, and helps you launch a new meme coin is what decentralization. But in reality, decentralization is a way of, quote unquote, organizing a society. It's not really organization. It's kind of what happens when people are left to do what they want. I point to the American Revolution. Early America is a great example of decentralization, where people said, look, you're not going to tell us what to do. You're not going to tax us. We're going to be, part of kind of a collective. We're like, hey, we're Americans. We're people from Massachusetts, whatever identity you want to do. But in general, the federal government doesn't really have any power. And people are free to be in whatever county and town they want. And sure, every town has its own rules. And you can leave the town and go to a different town, right? Because we don't want to live without rules, right? Anarchy doesn't mean you don't have rules. It just means that you have a lot of optionality. And so that's kind of what decentralization is. Now, from a privacy perspective, if you think about centralization, the idea of centralization, let's go to the Soviet Union. What Stalin and his advisors said is, we're not going to have people do just what they want. We're not going to have people live where they want. We're going to uproot them. We're going to come up with a scientific way of arranging society and economics. And we're going to, okay, now these farmers, you're going over here. We need to harvest these things. And we need this amount of coal. And we need this infrastructure. And it's all coming from the top down. There's a problem with that. Obviously, you're not taking into account human motivation. There's immense exposure. This center has to know all of the parts. Okay, so privacy is impossible metaphysically in a centralized system. because the center has to know the parts, as opposed to decentralization where there's connections between all the parts, but sometimes this one's not connected to this one. And in general, the part can be totally isolated if it wants to. Okay, so that's decentralization. So decentralized tools and philosophy is really the only way to get to human freedom and privacy. As far as technological tools, people like to talk about, let's focus on Bitcoin and Monero, two cryptocurrencies, and how they do it. So how they do it is there's no center. There's nobody who owns Bitcoin. Monero controls it. Okay, you can go to the GitHub of Bitcoin, let's say, and look at the code. Well, that's not what Bitcoin is, because what Bitcoin is everybody who's participating in the Bitcoin system has their own copy of Bitcoin. They run it on their own node. Okay, a node is just a server, a computer that is dedicated to running Bitcoin in your house. And then you connect to another computer and another computer, et cetera. You become the Bitcoin network. So 51% of people is Bitcoin at any given time. And so that's a really cool way. That was a really ingenious way of creating a system that is not dependent on a center whatsoever. So you have privacy. Okay, there's no center that knows who you are. You can do it anonymously, and you have a kind of a voting system as well, where as long as everybody's kind of 51%, you have this really cool tool where you can, with scarcity and all these money characteristics, where you can send money back and forth. There's no central repository of this Bitcoin, right? The Bitcoin ledger is simply a list of everybody who owns everything that is just passed along between the nodes, and it's updated every 10 minutes. Really cool, ingenious system. So that's a good example of how decentralization can work very well and can give people a lot of freedom and privacy.
What are some other methods that you'd recommend just in our everyday lives to start to check out of some of these systems and be part of a more decentralized world? If we have to have some sort of telecommunication, things of this nature, what are some of the products you'd recommend?
All right, let's start with your phone. Mm-hmm. So your phone, as we discussed, is really a privacy nightmare, but let's not focus too much on that. We're releasing our module explaining phone privacy in our main course on Escape the Technocracy. So I'm really fresh on how to think about phones in a structured way. First thing we want to do is we want to stop using our SMS text messaging and our legacy phone calls. That stuff is completely in the clear. Interested parties can access that right through the radio waves and by hacking the service providers. This is a serious vulnerability. I saw recently China hacked into like 12 telecoms companies, and they scooped up all kinds of data from Americans, all the text, phone calling potentially, etc. It's not good. So easy thing you can do is switch to a private messenger. Okay, private messenger is one that uses end-to-end encryption. Okay, we have this amazing technology called encryption, where only you and the recipient have the keys to unlock the message, and it happens pretty instantaneously these days. So you don't even notice it's happening. So something like Signal, I know some people, they don't like Signal private messenger. Well, there's others. You have Session, you have Simplex. There's a few of these out there. Move all of your main contacts to a private messenger. Very simple thing to do. They have to have it as well. Okay, that's how it works. But you can move everybody over to private messaging. And so that's one simple thing you can do with your phone. There's a lot more, but if you just do that, you're starting off pretty strong. Let's move to your computer. Well, let's actually step back and think about your internet. I'm always connected to a virtual private network, a VPN, anytime I'm connected to the internet. What that does is it hides your internet activity from your internet service provider. It does offload it to somebody else, but that somebody else, such as Molvad VPN or iVPN, has been vetted, trusted, mostly vetted, right? We don't trust anybody, but vetted to not be logging anything. So we might do that, or we might use so that the internet service provider can't see what we're doing. So get a VPN, use a VPN on your phone, on your computer. You can even get it on the router level, so all of your traffic is protected by the VPN. If you don't trust the VPN or you want something else that's free, the Tor browser is a great option. Tor is a technology, works similarly to VPNs. Great option, the Tor browser. So you do those three things, you're headed in a good direction. Beyond that, I'll say one more thing and then let you jump in and steer us in whatever direction you want. Think about all the big tech options you're using and think about an alternative. Okay, you use Gmail. Well, maybe migrate over to Proton Mail. You use YouTube. Well, see if it's on Rumble or Odyssey.
Mhm.
you use Windows or Mac OS. Well, learn about Linux. Okay, this is also something we talk about in our courses, in my book, etc. Linux is a free and open source software operating system. So we see what's going on. There's no tracking like is happening in Windows, especially also in Mac. So we can learn about Linux and move over. Once you do any of these steps, and especially let's say Linux, you're going to feel very free. You know you're not being tracked, and you have a lot more freedom to say what you want, investigate what you want, and you've started off, especially the mindset of seeing what the problem is, finding an alternative. That's really what it comes down to.
Mm. Are you concerned at all about the future of podcasting platforms, and is it possible that they could be compromised?
Podcasting is pretty extraordinary. Actually, it's another good example of decentralized technology because in the past, you had to be approved by the FCC to say anything over the quote unquote airwaves, right? Now we have the internet, and podcasting is, there's no center of podcasting, right? You basically you do go through a service, but I guess theoretically you can make your own service where you're uploading it to various podcast repositories. And there's infinite hundreds, certainly hundreds or thousands of podcast players that can access this. So Spotify can censor you, yes, and they have censored things. I think famously they took down Joe Rogan's talks with Alex Jones when Joe Rogan went over there. Some of my favorite ones, by the way. One of them I remember got me out of a bout of depression. It was so amazing. So Spotify can censor, Apple Podcasts can censor. And if we're being honest, those are like 50, 60% of all podcast traffic is those two players. However, you can always tell your audience, hey, we're going to migrate over here, make sure you're out of Spotify somewhere else. So I think it's going to be a cat and mouse game. We have seen politicians. I remember recently, I don't remember who exactly said, yeah, we need to crack down on podcasts. And that's going to be difficult for them. Not impossible. They can go after Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But then we'll just have to tell people, hey, it's time to go to Rumble. It's time to go to Odyssey, BitChute. That's where you'll have to listen to me. And of course, you just have your website hosted in a place that's outside the US, in a bulletproof hosting jurisdiction, and you just upload direct MP3s to your website. That's always the tried and true method. So yeah, that can create a dent in things. I think it would be difficult for them to censor podcasts, but it's certainly not outside of their appetite and probably not entirely outside of their reach.
Right on. We got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything important that we haven't covered about privacy or what we can do individually to navigate this to close out with?
I'll just talk briefly about the privacy cryptocurrency Monero.
Yeah.
I don't talk about cryptocurrency as, hey, invest in this, et cetera, because there's a lot of garbage out there. And most of these things are scams, and I don't think that these things are worth the price that they're being sold for, especially something like Bitcoin. I like Monero as a privacy cryptocurrency. It uses all the things we talked about: decentralization, encryption, all these sorts of good things. It combines them. If you want to get into Monero, I have some episodes on my show, Watchman Privacy. Introduction to Monero is something you could search for. Learn about it. It's a great way to get outside of the credit card situation that you're in. The big tech finance options. If you're a creator, you can take donations in Monero. There are a lot of places to use it, in fact. So that's a great thing for people to look into as well. Along the way, you're going to learn a lot of things about how these systems work, how to verify code, how to get good operational security. That's all kind of part of the package of getting into a cryptocurrency like Monero. You're going to learn a lot of things, a lot of other important things through osmosis. So Monero.
Right on. Well, Gabriel, thank you so much. This is fantastic information. I'd love to have you back on in the future. There's a lot more we can cover. Before we close out, remind the audience how they can find you, your podcast, website, shop, everything you got.
Absolutely. So the podcast that I do is Watchman Privacy. Just search for Watchman Privacy any place you search for. And I'd say if you want to take action, you've liked some of the things I've said, you want to purchase something, escapethetechnocracy.com. We have courses, AI, getting into Bitcoin, general privacy, books, etc. I do have a code. I do have a code for the audience. If you use Forbidden. If you use Forbidden, you'll get 15% off your purchase. So definitely take advantage of that. Anything there is really going to send you in an interesting direction about freeing yourself from the big tech options, taking things back into your own hands. So Watchman Privacy is the show, and then escapethetechnocracy.com is the website where you can get access, take action on some of these things that I've said today.
Awesome. Well, I will have those links right in the description. Use that code forbidden. You'll get 15% off, like you said. Gabriel, thank you so much. Like I said, we'll do this again. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. We'll see you then. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history. You can now stream the forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana free on Tubi TV, which is available on Fire Stick, Roku, iOS, and Android.